Let me be clear about one thing. I was not chosen. I was not special. I was the guy who cleaned the toilets in the most prestigious magic academy on the continent. My name is Kai, 18 years old, no magic, no family name worth mentioning, no future that anyone would bother writing down in a history book. Eldenmore Academy had 3,000 students, lords, duchesses, prodigies who could level a building by sneezing wrong. And then there was me, holding a mop. I swept floors. I carried luggage. I scrubbed cauldrons so old they had names. Mine was Gerald. Gerald smelled like regret and burnt hair every single morning. Every morning I woke up at 4, not because I wanted to, because Professor Aldrich Voss would personally kick my door open if I was even 30 seconds late. Voss, let me paint you a picture. Imagine the coldest, most arrogant man alive. Now give him fire magic, powerful enough to melt castle walls. That was my boss. He was the head professor of elemental combat. Youngest department head in academy history. Absolute genius. Also, the single worst human being to work for. My job was to clean his office, prepare his materials, and exist as invisibly as possible. 2 years, not one problem. Until the day everything went completely wrong. Until the day I accidentally absorbed his entire magical core and nearly destroyed the east wing of the academy. But let me back up, because that morning started normal. I arrived at his office at exactly 4:59, 1 minute early. He noticed. He always noticed. He looked up and said, without blinking, "You're late." I did not argue. Arguing with Voss was like arguing with a thunderstorm. Technically possible, practically pointless, guaranteed to ruin your entire day before it began. His office was enormous, 3 floors of bookshelves, a ceiling enchanted to show real-time weather, a fireplace that burned blue because regular fire was beneath him. On his desk sat a crystal containment sphere, about the size of my head, glowing faintly orange, warm even from across the room. Looking important in that way, powerful things always do. Clean around it. Do not touch it. Do not look at it longer than necessary. Do not breathe on it. He didn't look up when he said this, just kept writing. I asked what it was. I genuinely don't know why. 2 years of working for this man had taught me that questions from servants were not something he found valuable. He looked up slowly. The kind of slow that means someone is deciding whether to answer you or simply set you on fire to save time. Then he spoke. A compressed elemental core, 7 years of accumulated combat magic, stored for my thesis demonstration next week. If you touch it, I will ensure your next job involves a mop and a sewer. I nodded. I was not going to touch it. I was absolutely 100% not going to touch it. I started cleaning, shelf by shelf, careful and methodical. The dust in magical spaces defied physics, little golden particles that drifted upward instead of down. I worked my way across the room, staying as far from the sphere as possible. And then Gerald happened. Gerald the cauldron, balanced on my cart. The wheel of that cart had been slightly loose for 3 weeks. I had reported it twice. Facilities management told me to fill out a form. The form required a supervisor signature. My supervisor was Voss. I was not asking Voss to sign a form about a wheel, so the wheel was still loose, and when I turned near his desk, the wheel caught on the rug and the cart lurched, and Gerald slid and I grabbed him and stepped back hard. My back hit the shelf. The shelf shook. The sphere rolled toward the edge of the desk in what felt like the slowest and most inevitable second of my entire life. The sphere rolled off. I dropped Gerald. I reached out, not because I was brave or heroic, because it was pure physical reflex before my brain had even finished waking up. I caught the sphere with both hands. The world went white, not bright, not blinding, just completely, totally, absolutely white, like someone deleted the universe and forgot to replace it. Then something moved through me, from my palms, up my arms, through my chest, into whatever place inside a person holds the things they cannot explain with words. It felt like swallowing a sun, warm and enormous and completely too large for the space it was entering. Every nerve in my body fired at once, and then it stopped. I was standing in Voss's office, sphere in my hands, empty now, clear, like a snow globe where all the snow had simply ceased to exist without warning or explanation. Voss was on his feet, His chair was across the room. I did not see him move it. He was staring at me with an expression I had never once seen on his face before. Ulrich Voss did not do shock. He did control displeasure. He did refine disappointment. He did the specific look that made first-year students cry in hallways. What he was doing right now was none of those things. He looked at me the way a mathematician looks at an answer that shouldn't exist but keeps appearing on the page. "Put that down," he said, very quietly. I put it down. It made a small sound on his desk, like an empty glass. Then he said, "Step back." I stepped back. Silence. He walked toward me slowly, pulled a thin measuring rod from his coat, held it in front of me. It glowed immediately, bright, violent, unstable orange, the same color as the sphere. He stared at the rod, then at me, then at the rod again, 3 times, like he kept hoping the answer would change if he checked it enough. It did not change. "How are you still standing?" Not a question, a statement he was making to himself, like a man running a calculation that keeps returning an impossible result. That sphere held 7 years of high-grade elemental energy. Absorbing it without a prepared vessel kills a trained mage in under 4 seconds. You are not a trained mage. "No, sir." "You have no recorded magical ability." "No, sir." "You clean my office." "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a very long time after that, long enough to get uncomfortable. "You are going to say nothing? To no one? About any of this?" "Okay." "Not to the other servants, not to your friend in the kitchens, not in your sleep." "I don't talk in my sleep." He looked at me flatly. "You said Gerald smells wrong 4 times last Tuesday. The entire East Dormitory heard you." I chose not to respond. "Go. Your shift is done. Leave Gerald. I will deal with the cauldron." I left. Down the stairs, through the stone corridor, past the statue of the founder, who always looked disappointed. I made it to the courtyard before my legs sat me down on a bench without my permission. Okay, so I had just absorbed 7 years of a powerful professor's magic through a loose cartwheel. I held up my right hand and looked at it. Completely normal, a little dry around the knuckles, a small scar from when Gerald had been aggressive about being scrubbed 3 months ago. Normal hand, nothing glowing, nothing crackling, nothing visibly wrong at all. But something was there, warm and patient and very, very large, like a new room in a house you know completely. I pressed my palm flat on the stone bench. A small orange flame appeared between my fingers, quiet, controlled. Then I panicked and yanked my hand back, and it vanished instantly. I looked around the courtyard. Empty. Early morning. One junior student running laps with the grim determination of someone who made terrible choices at course registration. No one else. I put my hand back in my lap and sat very still and thought about my situation. I had absorbed the magical core of the most feared professor at Eldenmore Academy. I could now apparently produce fire. I had been told to tell absolutely no one. My only confidant was a cauldron that could not talk back. Cool, totally manageable situation. Completely fine. I went to breakfast. The servant dining hall was in the basement. Long wooden tables, decent food, zero decoration. People who actually worked for a living ate here. My friend Sora was already there. She ran the potion supply room on the 3rd floor. She knew everything about everyone because professors talked while she counted herbs. "You look weird," she said the moment I sat down. "Good morning to you too." "No, genuinely weird, like someone who just did something they can't tell anyone about." "Rough morning." "Voss?" "Always Voss." She narrowed her eyes. Sora had the inconvenient talent of knowing when something was being left out of a story. It was impressive and occasionally terrifying. I changed the subject. I asked about the supply room drama involving Professor Myron and a missing shipment of silver bell root. She launched into detail. I was safe. But under the table, I pressed my thumb against my finger. Very small, very quiet, a tiny spark, orange and warm, absolutely there. I closed my hand around it before it did anything interesting. The next 3 days were the most stressful of my life, and I had spent 2 years working for Ulrich Voss, so that bar was genuinely not low. I went about my shifts normally, cleaned, carried, scrubbed Gerald, who had been returned to my cart without comment, served Voss his morning documentation, avoided eye contact, said nothing, did everything right. Voss said nothing about what had happened, acted as though that morning had not occurred. If not for the warmth sitting in my chest every waking moment, I might have thought I dreamed it. But I practiced, late at night in my small room after lights out, when the corridors were quiet and the only sound was the distant hum of the Academy's permanent enchantments. Small things at first, a flame in my palm, a spark between fingers. Once, a small fireball the size of a marble that I immediately smothered in my blanket because I panicked hard. The blanket was barely singed. The magic seemed to know how to control itself better than I did, which was honestly a little embarrassing for someone who supposedly owned it now. On the fourth day, something changed. I was cleaning the second-floor corridor outside the advanced elemental classroom. Third-year students were leaving after lecture. Third years had been here long enough to ignore servants the way you ignore furniture. Except one of them stopped directly in front of me with the energy of someone who has just found entertainment. Marcus Vane, heir to House Vane, one of the 6 original founding families, fire specialist, known for 2 things, exceptional talent and the cruelty of someone who had never heard the word no. Servant, he said. Yes. This floor is dirty. I looked at the floor. I had just cleaned it. It was the cleanest floor in the academy right now. I knew a clean floor when I stood on one. I'll take another pass, I said. See that you do. He stepped closer, not touching me, just occupying my space with the confidence of someone who knew the institution was entirely on his side. I need you to clean the practice room too. My study group leaves a mess. I can add it to tomorrow's schedule. Today. My schedule is full today. He blinked, recalibrating. Do you know who I am? Marcus Vane, 3rd year, fire specialization, top of your cohort last semester. He had expected deference or ignorance. I had given him neither. He did not like that. It would be very simple, he said slowly, for me to speak to Dean Harrow about whether your position here is still necessary. The warmth in my chest moved, just slightly, listening. I took a breath. I'll have the practice room done by evening, after my regular schedule. He stared at me another moment, then walked away. His friends followed. One looked back at me. I stood in the corridor and breathed and told the warmth in my chest to settle down. It did. Slowly. That was the moment I understood something important about what was living inside me now. Whatever had come from that sphere, it was not passive. It was aware of my emotions, of tension, of the specific feeling you get when someone is trying to make you feel worthless. That night, I sat in my room and had an honest conversation with myself. I had power now. Real power. 3rd years spent years developing what I had absorbed in one accidental second. No one knew, except Voss, and Voss had told me to stay quiet. The question was what I was going to do with something I was not supposed to have, in a place that had never considered me worth noticing. I looked at my hand in the dark, called up the flame. It came immediately, no hesitation, sitting in my palm like it had always lived there, warm, patient, waiting for something. For the first time in 2 years of cold corridors and early mornings and Gerald and Voss and 1,000 small moments of being invisible, I felt something I had almost forgotten, interested in what came next. The flame flickered once, like it agreed with me, and then on the 5th day, Voss called me back into his office and changed everything I thought I understood. Sit down, he said. I sat. This was already unusual. In 2 years, he had never invited me to sit in his office. I stood. I cleaned. Sitting felt like something was about to happen. He opened a drawer and placed a folder on the desk between us. Inside was a single page, handwritten, old enough that the edges had gone soft with time and handling. Do you know what an absorption type mage is? He asked. No. Historically, one appears approximately every 40 to 60 years. They present with 0 active magical output, no detectable core. Standard assessment marks them as non-magical. Every assessment you have ever taken would have marked you exactly that way. He paused. An absorption type does not produce magic, they receive it. Their core exists in a permanently open state, dormant until something of sufficient magnitude makes contact. He looked at me steadily. That sphere was sufficient magnitude. I sat with this. So I was always going to be able to do this. If the right catalyst made contact. Yes. And you knew. He did not answer immediately, which was its own kind of answer. The sphere was not an accident, he said finally. The cartwheel was not an accident. I have been observing your assessments for 8 months. The pattern of a dormant type is distinctive. I stared at him. You set this up. The loose wheel, Gerald, the sphere on the edge of the desk. I positioned an opportunity. What you did with it was entirely your own choice and action. Why? He was quiet. He looked at the folder, then back at me. The pause was long enough that the blue fireplace crackled twice before he decided to say the thing he was going to say. Because absorption types are rare, and what happens to rare things in this academy when identified through official channels is not education. It is study. It is extraction. It is taking things apart. I understood what he meant. I had seen enough of this academy to know how power worked here. Students with unusual abilities were recruited into research programs, guided into paths that served the institution. An absorption type would not be guided. They would be seized. So, you wanted to be the one who found me first, I said. I wanted to ensure that when you were found, you had enough control to choose. The former option required moving before anyone else's assessments caught the pattern. He folded his hands on the desk. One more thing. What happened to the last one, 60 years ago? He closed the folder. That is a longer conversation, one we will have when you are ready for it. He stood. For now, you continue your shifts, you practice privately, you tell no one. And you come to my office every morning 30 minutes before your shift begins. For what? Training. He said it the way you say an obvious thing to someone taking too long to arrive at it. One more thing. The sphere held fire energy. That is what you absorbed. But absorption types do not stop at one source. He glanced back at me from the window, just briefly. Every elemental source you encounter from this point forward is a potential addition. You will need control before that becomes a serious problem. He turned away. You are dismissed. I left his office for the second time that week with my legs making decisions about walking without consulting me. Absorption type, one every 40 to 60 years, and apparently just the beginning. I passed the statue of the Academy founder in the corridor. He looked disappointed as always. Same, I told him quietly. He did not respond. I was having enough unexpected conversations already. Training started the next morning. I had expected something dramatic. A dedicated training space. Equipment. What I got was Voss at his desk doing paperwork while pointing at a single white candle. Light it, he said. With what? With what is inside you? What did you think I meant? I looked at the candle, very small, very expectant. I reached for the warmth and extended it outward. The candle exploded. No fire, just the wick and half the wax launched across the desk at speed. Voss caught the wax piece in his hand without looking up from his paperwork. He said simply, "Less." "Right. Considerably less." "I understand." "Imagine lighting the candle, not relocating it to another continent." "I hear you." We did this for 40 minutes. Every morning after that, the same. By the end of the third week, I could maintain a sustained flame for over 4 minutes, precise enough to light a candle from across the room without disturbing it. Voss checked his measuring rod and said nothing. Small things, but precision is harder than power. Voss had explained this on the second morning. Large output is just pressure. Precision is architecture. I was building architecture, quietly, invisibly. And then, on a Thursday morning in the 4th week, I was cleaning the 4th floor observatory when I heard the door open below. 2 voices. I recognized both immediately. Marcus Vane and Professor Harrow, the Dean. I stayed completely still, high up behind one of the large brass telescope mounts, not hiding exactly, just not announcing that I was there. "The absorption type trace," Harrow was saying, low and precise. "You are certain the reading was genuine? The monitoring stone flagged it 5 weeks ago. Eastern Tower, Voss's office. My stomach did something deeply unpleasant, and Voss has reported nothing. Nothing. I checked the staff incident logs personally. Harrow went quiet. The observatory felt very large and very cold. Absorption types are extraordinarily rare. The last documented case was 62 years ago. The Academy's protocols for handling such an individual are very specific. Vane said quietly, "I know the protocols." "Then you know that identification and containment are to be reported immediately to the Academic Council. Whatever Voss thinks he is doing, it is outside his authority." Containment. That word sat in my chest. I can continue monitoring if the source is still in the Eastern Tower vicinity. "Discreetly," Harrow said. "I do not want Voss alerted. Not yet. Find me the source, Marcus, before Voss moves." The door closed. I stood behind the telescope mount, and the flame inside my chest burned quietly and did not make a single sound. They knew something had happened. They did not know it was me. Yet I finished cleaning the observatory. Every surface, methodical and thorough. Because panicking at the top of a tower with glass walls and no exits was not useful. Doing your job was something you could control. I went back down the stairs, past the portraits of historical academy heads who all looked like they had never once questioned whether the rules they enforced were actually good ones for everyone involved. I needed to tell Voss, and I needed to do it without looking like someone who had just overheard something they were not supposed to hear. Walking in at my regular time. Regular expression, regular tone. Gerald rattled quietly on the cart behind me as I walked through the corridor toward the Eastern Tower stairs. I looked down at him briefly. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I know." The Dean of Eldenmore Academy was looking for me. He had used the word containment. Somewhere in this building, Vane was monitoring with a stone that had already flagged my location. I had been invisible for 2 years. I had been nothing. The servant with the cauldron and the loose cartwheel, and the room in the basement that smelled like stone and dust. And now, without choosing any of it, I was the most interesting and dangerous problem in this entire academy. The warmth in my chest burned steadily, patient, waiting, not frightened at all. I was frightened enough for both of us, and in this academy, being frightened and being smart were not mutually exclusive. I intended to be both. If you could absorb any type of magic in this world, what would you choose? Drop it in the comments. Fire, time, shadows, something else? Let's see what you'd pick. I told Voss that same evening. I waited until my shift ended, walked back up to his office, and said what I had heard word for word. He listened without moving. When I finished, he was quiet for exactly 11 seconds. I counted. When Voss went that quiet, it meant something was happening behind his eyes that he was not ready to share yet. "Harrow has a monitoring stone in the observatory," he said finally. I should have anticipated that. That was a miscalculation on my part. He said it the way people admit things they find genuinely annoying. "A miscalculation," I repeated. "They used the word containment. That feels like more than a miscalculation." He looked at me. "Yes, it does." He stood and walked to the window. "Dean Harrow has been attempting to build a research division for advanced anomalous mage types for 11 years. He has never had a subject worthy of the program." He paused. "Until now. So I'm a subject. You are a potential subject. There is a difference. One requires your cooperation. The other does not require anything from you at all." I sat with that for a moment. What does containment actually mean in practice? He turned from the window. His expression was the most honest I had ever seen it, which was not saying a great deal, but it was something. "It means a dedicated facility in the lower academy, supervised at all times, your abilities studied, catalogued, and directed toward institutional research goals for as long as they deem useful. And when they're done being useful..." He did not answer, which was its own kind of answer, and not the kind anyone wants to receive when they ask about their own future. I looked at my hands. The warmth inside my chest was steady and calm. It seemed entirely unbothered by conversations about its own containment. I found that either reassuring or concerning, depending on the moment. How long before Vane identifies me specifically? If he is running systematic scans of the Eastern Tower, 3 days, perhaps 4 if we vary your schedule in the corridors he has flagged. And if he identifies me? Then Harrow moves, and at that point, the decision is no longer yours to make or mine to protect. He sat back down at his desk. So we need to move faster. Faster with what, exactly? Your training. The control you have now is sufficient for basic concealment. It is not sufficient for what comes after basic concealment. I waited. There is a way to suppress an absorption signature entirely, a specific level of internal discipline that makes the core undetectable to standard monitoring stones. He looked at me steadily. Achieving it normally takes a trained mage approximately 2 years of focused practice. You have shown a learning rate I have not observed before in any student I have taught in 17 years. So you think I can do it faster? I think you have approximately 72 hours to try. Yes. He pulled a second folder from his desk. This one was thicker, older. Inside were pages of diagrams, intricate geometric patterns, mathematical notation I could not read. And at the top of the first page, in handwriting different from Voss's, a name, Ilan Morrow. Absorption type, documented 1962, Eldenmore Academy Archive. The name sat on the page like something that had been waiting to be found. The last one, I said. Voss nodded once. What happened to him? He closed the folder again. That was the second time he had closed that folder when I asked that question. Later, he said, tonight you practice suppression. I will give you the technique. It is not comfortable. It requires holding the warmth you feel completely inward, compressing it, making it small, like hiding it, like convincing it that it does not exist, which is harder than it sounds when it is already aware of itself. He was right. That was going to be considerably harder than it sounded. He walked me through the technique for an hour. It involved a specific kind of focused inward pressure, like trying to hold your breath, but with something that did not breathe. I was bad at it immediately. The flame kept pushing back, not aggressively, just persistently, like it did not understand why I was trying to make it smaller when everything had been going so well lately with the getting larger approach. Stop fighting it, Voss said. You are trying to suppress it by force. That does not work with absorption type energy. You need to persuade it. I need to persuade my own magic. Yes, that is insane. That is accurate. Try again. I tried again and again. By the end of the hour, I had managed to reduce the ambient signature by roughly 40%, according to his measuring rod. He looked at the rod for a moment, then he said, tomorrow morning, an hour earlier than usual. I started to leave. Kai. I stopped. He was not looking at me, looking at the folder. The technique works. It has worked before. You are not in a position where the outcome is predetermined. He said it carefully, the way someone says a thing they mean, but that does not come easily. Okay, I said. I left. I walked back through the corridor, past the founder's statue. He looked disappointed as always. For the first time, I found that slightly funny instead of just discouraging. I went to bed. I did not sleep particularly well, but I practiced the suppression technique in the dark for 3 hours, and by the time I stopped, the reading would have been down to maybe 30%. Maybe. That single word kept doing an enormous amount of work in my life lately. I was getting tired of how often it showed up where certainty should have been. The next morning, Sora was waiting outside my door. This was unusual. Sora did not do door visits. Sora respected the concept of private space with a firmness that bordered on philosophical. What happened? I said. Nothing happened. I just wanted to walk to breakfast with you. I looked at her. Sora, there are 3 students doing a corridor survey on the eastern floors this morning. What kind of survey? The kind where they carry a small grey stone in a wooden case and write things in notebooks. I noticed them yesterday too, near the stairwell by Voss's office. She said it completely casually, looking at the wall. I looked at the wall too. We stood in the corridor together, looking at the wall like 2 people who were absolutely not having a significant conversation. That's interesting, I said. Isn't it? She said. She pushed off the wall and started walking toward breakfast. I walked beside her. Neither of us said anything else about it, but she had warned me. She had noticed, connected it to me somehow through whatever filing system she ran in her head, and she had come to my door before my shift, without asking anything in return. I thought about that the entire walk to breakfast. about what it meant when someone did something like that, about what you owed a person who warned you without asking you to explain anything. I decided that whatever I owed her, it was significant, and that at some point, probably soon, the question of how much to tell Sora was going to stop being something I could defer. The survey students were doing a second pass near the eastern stairwell when I started my shift. I took the western route to Voss's office. Longer, 3 extra minutes, completely worth it. The suppression technique was holding at about 25% residual signature by the second training session. Voss watched his measuring rod with an expression I was beginning to read as cautious optimism. "The stone they are using," he said, "has a detection threshold of approximately 15% ambient output. Below that, it registers as background noise. You need to reach 12 to be safe." 12, I said. "I'm at 25. Yes." "In how many hours?" "Ideally before this evening's survey sweep." I looked at him. "That's very specific, and also not enough time." "No," he agreed, "it is not. Which is why we are going to try something I had not planned to introduce until week 6. He reached into his desk and placed an object between us. A small, dark stone, smooth, about the size of a walnut. It had a faint pulse to it, like a slow heartbeat you could see rather than feel. I had never seen anything like it before. "A dampening anchor," he said. "It does not suppress your output directly. It gives the internal compression something to hold against, like a wall you push toward, rather than pushing into empty space." "You said the technique was about persuading it, not fighting it." "The anchor doesn't fight. It provides structure. There is a difference between a wall and an opponent." He pushed it toward me. I picked it up. The warmth in my chest shifted immediately, tilted toward the stone, like two things recognizing each other across a very small distance. It was a strange and specific feeling. "Hold it and run the suppression." I did. The difference was immediate. Instead of trying to compress inward against nothing, there was a direction, a shape, something to move toward and hold against. 25% became 18 in about 4 minutes, then 15, then 13. Voss watched his measuring rod with an expression that, on any other person, might have been called relief. 12.4, he said. "The stone's threshold is 15. You are below detection." He paused. "Keep the anchor in your pocket during every shift. Do not let it out of contact with your skin." "What is it made of?" "That is not relevant to your immediate situation. It's relevant to me." He looked at me for a moment. "Compressed null stone from the lower vaults. There is one other piece in existence." He did not say where. I did not push. I had learned enough about Voss in 2 years to understand that information came in layers, and he released each layer when he had decided you were ready for it. I pocketed the anchor and went to my shift 3 hours late. Voss wrote me a schedule exception note with the quiet fury of someone who found paperwork offensive. The note was perfectly formatted down to the margins. Even his resentment was immaculate and correct. I chose to find that quietly admirable and said nothing about it to anyone. The survey students passed me in the corridor at 11 in the morning. Grey stone in a wooden case. Notebook. Marcus Vane walking behind them with his hands in his pockets, watching the readings. I was carrying a stack of linens, head down, moving at exactly the pace of someone who had somewhere specific to be and no interest in anyone around them. Standard servant invisibility. 2 years of practice. Vane's eyes passed over me, moved on. The grey stone in its case showed nothing worth writing down. I kept walking, turned the corner, kept my breathing completely even and my pace completely identical. I did not let out a breath until I was 2 floors away. Then I pressed my back against the wall in an empty corridor and stood there for about 45 seconds doing nothing but existing. 12.4%, below the threshold. The anchor in my pocket was warm against my palm through the fabric. I pressed my fingers around it, and the warmth in my chest settled into something steadier. Okay, first real test. Passed. Barely, and with help, and with absolutely no margin for error, but passed. I pushed off the wall and went back to work. Gerald was waiting on my cart with his usual expression of ambient judgment. Yeah, I told him quietly. "I know I'm late." He did not respond. He never did. That was the thing about Gerald. Reliable. No opinions about my life choices. Occasionally explosive when scrubbed too aggressively. In many ways, the ideal companion for this particular situation. 3 more days passed. Voss continued the training sessions. The suppression held consistently below 12%. The survey team ran 2 more passes through the eastern tower and found nothing to write down. On the 4th day, something shifted inside the warmth. I was practicing the suppression alone in my room when the flame felt different. Not larger, not smaller. Just different in a way I could not name. I held my palm flat and called up the fire, still orange and warm, but the edges were doing something they had not done before. I stood in my room, deciding whether that was wrong or simply new. The difference mattered more than it might seem. Wrong meant a problem to fix. New meant something to understand before deciding anything else. I held my palm flat, called up the fire. What appeared was not the controlled orange flame I had been working with for weeks. It was still fire, but the edges of it were doing something wrong, or something new. I was not sure which. Thin threads of dark at the outer edge. Not shadow exactly. More like the space between flames, made briefly visible. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I closed my hand and sat very still and thought about what Voss had said. Every elemental source you encounter from this point forward is a potential addition. I had been near a lot of things in 3 weeks. Cleaning supplies with mild magical properties, enchanted fixtures in the corridors, the dampening anchor itself, which was made of null stone and had its own particular energy. Had I absorbed something without noticing, without doing anything intentional at all? I pressed my hand flat against the floor. The orange flame appeared again. The dark threads were still there. I thought about that for a long time. Then I went to sleep because it was late and I had to be up at 4, and some problems are better approached after rest than in the dark alone at midnight. The next morning I showed Voss. He did not react immediately. He ran the measuring rod twice, walked around me in a slow circle, and then looked at the flame in my palm for a very long time. "The null stone," he said finally. "You absorbed a residual trace of it. The anchor has been in contact with your skin for 4 days." He said it with the specific tone of someone recalculating something. "Is that a problem?" "It is unexpected. Null energy in combination with fire energy produces a suppression layer from the inside outward. It should theoretically be impossible in a single host." "But here we are," I said quietly. He looked at me for a moment, then at the flame still burning in my palm with its dark and impossible edges, and said nothing for several seconds. "What does it feel like when you hold them together?" I thought about it for a moment. Quieter, like 2 sounds that cancel each other out completely. He made a note. Did not explain the note. Closed the notebook. "Continue as normal. Do not attempt to separate them deliberately. What integrates naturally should be allowed to integrate naturally. And if it keeps absorbing things without me noticing, then we adjust." He said it like an adjustment was a simple thing. Like discovering you spontaneously absorb new magic was a scheduling complication. I looked at him for a moment. He looked back at me with the unblinking steadiness of someone who had already adjusted to considerably worse. I went to breakfast. Sora was already there, looking at me the way she had been for weeks, the way that meant she was filing things quietly and would reach a conclusion that did not require my input. She was going to reach the right conclusion whether I told her or not. The only real question was whether I got ahead of it or spent the next week watching her arrive there alone. "The survey team is gone," she said. "All 3 left yesterday." "Is that unusual?" "Students doing corridor surveys don't just stop after a week. Either they found what they needed or someone told them to stop." She stirred her tea, looked at the wall behind me instead of at my face, giving me room to decide what to do with the information. I kept my face neutral. "Probably found what they needed." "Probably," she said. She stirred her tea. "Or someone made whatever they were looking for impossible to find." She didn't look at me when she said that. I looked at the side of her face. She kept her eyes on her tea. The morning hall was loud around us, voices and movement and the particular energy of people beginning another day without secrets pressing on them. "Sora," I said. She looked up. When I can tell you everything, I will. I promise you that. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Okay. She went back to her tea. That was all she needed. That afternoon, I was cleaning the third floor when I heard raised voices from behind a closed door. The practice room. I recognized Vane's voice immediately, and one other I could not place at first. Then I placed it. A girl's voice. Sharp. Not frightened. Angrier than frightened, which in my experience was the more interesting of the two options. I paused my cart outside the door. Report whatever you want to Harrow, the girl was saying. My scores are not your business. Your placement in the advanced track makes everything you do my business, Vane said. By what logic? Her voice was sharp, not frightened. Angrier than frightened, which was the more interesting of the two. By what logic? By the logic that the advanced track has limited spots, and some of us have been working for 3 years to earn placement without being handed it through evaluation exceptions. A pause. Then her voice came quieter and more precise. I earned my placement. Same tests, same criteria, same evaluation as everyone else. If you have a complaint, file it with the academic office. Don't bring your complaints about other people's test scores to a practice room and expect them to stand there and accept it, she finished precisely. The door opened a second later and she came out. A girl came out fast and nearly hit my cart. She stopped, looked at me, then the cart, then back at me. Short, dark hair and the expression of someone thoroughly exhausted by one conversation. Vane's voice came through the gap. She reached back and closed the door on it without looking. Clean and final as cutting a thread, till, sorry, I said. The cart. It's fine. She looked back at the closed door. Is he going to come out? He usually does whatever he was going to do, regardless of anything, I said honestly. She made a sound that was somewhere between a short laugh and something considerably less amused by the whole situation. Yeah, I have noticed that about him specifically, she said. She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something considerably less amused. Yeah, I've noticed. She looked at me properly for the first time. You work for Voss? It was not a question. I clean his office, yes. He's mentioned his servant a few times. Said you were punctual. She tilted her head. That's actually a significant compliment coming from him. I know, I said, which was true. In the Voss scale of acknowledgement, punctual sat somewhere between competent and possibly useful. High praise in the language of a man who had standards like cliff faces. Lyra, she said, not introducing herself exactly, more like offering the name as information. Kai, I said the same way. She nodded, looked at my cart. Gerald, she said, with a small and very specific smile. I looked at her. He mentioned Gerald too. He said, and I am quoting directly, that his servant named a cauldron, and this was either concerning or a sign of unusual psychological stability. He hadn't decided. I looked at Gerald. Gerald sat on the cart with the quiet dignity of something that had heard this kind of thing before and had opinions about it. It's the second one, I said. She smiled properly then. Good to know, she said. She pushed off the wall and started down the corridor at a pace that said she had somewhere else to be. Then stopped. Did not turn around. Vane is going to keep looking for whatever he thinks is in the Eastern Tower. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, you should be careful. Then she kept walking. I stood in the corridor with Gerald and watched her go. I thought about the specific kind of person who warns a complete stranger about something without asking why they should care. It was a small thing, but in this academy, small things that pointed in your direction were the ones worth paying attention to most. First, Sora, now Lyra. Two people offering something without asking for anything back. In an institution built entirely on hierarchy and the careful management of who had access to what, that was not ordinary. I found it worth thinking about, carefully and seriously worth thinking about before I decided what to do with it. I found that interesting and worth thinking about, carefully and seriously worth thinking about. I pushed Gerald down the corridor and went back to work. That night, I sat in my room and thought about the dark threads in my fire, and Lyra knowing my name through Voss and Sora, who had connected too many dots already, and the anchor stone warm in my pocket. And I thought about the folder on Voss's desk, the one he closed every time I asked about Elon Morrow, the last absorption type, 62 years ago. The conversation Voss kept saying we would have when I was ready. I was beginning to think ready was not a condition Voss intended to give me time to arrive at naturally, and that the story of what happened to Elon Morrow was not a comfort. It was a warning. I pressed the anchor stone between my palms in the dark of my room. Fire and something darker underneath, layered together in a way that should not have been possible in a single person. Maybe the null stone had only revealed what the fire had been waiting to find all along. The thought was either interesting or deeply concerning. I thought about what Voss had said. What integrates naturally should be allowed to integrate naturally. I thought about what else might integrate, given enough time and contact with enough different sources. I thought about the academy. 3,000 students, dozens of professors, centuries of accumulated magical energy in every stone and fixture and piece of furniture in this building. And me, cleaning every room, touching every surface, moving through every corridor every single day with an open core and no ability to choose what came near it. The anchor stone suppressed my signature. It did not stop the absorption itself. Two separate problems. Voss had only solved one of them, which meant he was still deciding whether to give me the other solution, or deciding whether I was ready to hear the answer to a question I had not yet thought to ask. In my experience with Voss, those were the most important answers of all. I would need to ask about that tomorrow, directly and without letting him close any more folders on me. Some things you had to push for. In this academy, everything you did not push for stayed exactly where it was. The flame in my palm was orange and dark and entirely mine. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I closed it carefully and went to sleep with the anchor stone warm against my fingers. But 3 hours later, I woke up suddenly in the dark and lay completely still and listened. Something in the corridor outside my door. Footsteps, very quiet, stopping, right outside my room. I held my breath. The anchor stone was on my desk across the room. The warmth in my chest went completely still the way it did when something was worth paying attention to. The footsteps did not move for a very long time. Then they moved away, down the corridor. And silence. I lay in the dark for a long time after that. Eyes open, thinking. Someone had stood outside my door at night and decided not to knock, or decided not to do something else. I did not know which. Both were interesting, neither was reassuring. I got up and crossed to my desk in the dark and picked up the anchor stone, held it until the warmth in my chest settled from fear into something that felt more like readiness. I got up, picked up the anchor stone, sat on the edge of my bed and held it and waited for the rest of the night to tell me what it was going to do next. The academy was never quiet. Something was always moving. Tonight, whatever was moving had come specifically to my door, and that meant the 72 hours Voss had calculated were already behind us. The next move had arrived ahead of schedule. It always did. That was the thing about plans made against people who were smarter than you expected. They moved when you were still adjusting your timeline. I needed to be ready before I was ready. In this academy, that was the only kind of ready that actually counted for anything at all. The kind that arrived before you had finished preparing for it. The kind you had to meet on its own terms. I did not sleep after that. I sat on the edge of my bed with the anchor stone in my hand and waited for the night to finish deciding what it was going to do. Nothing else came. No more footsteps, no sounds in the corridor, just the low hum of the academy's enchantments and the distant creak of old stone settling in the cold. By the time grey light started coming through my window, I had made a list in my head. Short, practical, the kind of list that keeps you from spending too much time on panic. 1. Find out who had been outside my door. 2. Tell Voss before he heard it from someone else. 3. Do not let Sora figure out anything else on her own before I talk to her properly. 4. Figure out what the dark threads in my fire actually were before they developed opinions of their own about how to behave in public situations. That last one felt the most urgent in a way that had nothing to do with Harrow or Vane or monitoring stones. That one was personal. That one was mine. I went to Voss's office 20 minutes before our usual training time. He was already there. He was always already there. I was beginning to suspect he simply did not leave. "Someone stood outside my door last night," I said. I did not sit down. I stood in the doorway the way I had for 2 years and delivered the information the same way I would report a cleaning issue. He looked up from his desk, set down his pen. That alone told me something. Voss did not set down his pen for minor things. "What time?" he said. "Around 2. They stayed for about a minute, then left." He was quiet. He picked up his measuring rod without looking at it and turned it between his fingers, the way someone handles a familiar object when they are thinking hard about something else entirely. "The monitoring stone Vane is using cannot track individuals," he said slowly. "It reads ambient output. It cannot tell him who the source is, only that the source was within a certain radius." "So, it wasn't Vane at my door?" "No. Vane would have no reason to approach servant quarters specifically." He set the rod down. "Someone else knows, or suspects, and came to verify something." "What would they verify at 2 in the morning?" He looked at me steadily. "Whether the reading changed when they moved closer, whether the source responded to presence. Sensing confirmation requires proximity." "A specific and deliberate kind of patience," he added quietly. "Which means Vane's study group has been doing this longer than I estimated. We are not the only ones who planned ahead." I thought about that. The anchor held 12%, below threshold. "Yes, which means they got nothing useful, but they came anyway." He paused. "Which means they are working from something other than the monitoring stone, something more personal than a reading." "Information," I said. He nodded once. "Someone told them something, not a reading, not a scan, a conversation, a name, a location." He folded his hands on the desk. "Someone talked." I thought about who knew. Voss, Sora, who did not know the details but had connected enough dots to come warn me about the survey team. Lyra, who knew only that I worked for Voss. "It wasn't Sora," I said. Voss looked at me. "You are certain?" "Yes." He accepted this without argument, which surprised me slightly. "Lyra Ashvan spoke to you yesterday. In the corridor, briefly. She is the daughter of House Ashvan, old family, long history with this academy." He paused. "Also currently under academic review for a disputed placement score. Vane mentioned the advanced track. He filed a formal complaint 2 weeks ago, claimed her evaluation was improperly weighted. Harrow is currently reviewing it." He looked at his desk. "She has significant reason to watch Vane carefully, and to warn people he is looking for things." "She warned me about him," I said. "She told me he was still looking." "Yes, she would have noticed his survey activity. House Ashvane produces perceptive people. It is something of a family trait." I thought about Lyra closing that door on Vane's voice. The clean, final way she had done it without hesitation or performance. The specific calm of someone who had been dealing with a particular kind of person long enough to have developed an efficient and completely automatic system for it. "If it wasn't Sora and it wasn't Lyra," I said slowly, "then someone inside this office said something." The room was quiet. Voss looked at me with an expression I could not immediately read. "There is a third possibility," he said. "One I had considered and dismissed. I am reconsidering it now." He stood and walked to the bookshelf behind his desk, ran one finger along the spines. He pulled out a slim volume, dark cover, no title on the spine. He opened it to a page near the middle and placed it on the desk facing me. "Read the first paragraph," he said. The handwriting was old and cramped but legible. The passage read, "The absorption type does not only receive energy from external sources. In advanced stages, the core begins projecting outward during sleep. Not magic, signal, the kind that sensitized individuals perceive at range without instrumentation." I read it twice. Then I looked up. "You are saying I am broadcasting in my sleep." "I am saying it is possible, if your integration has progressed further than your waking control suggests." The dark threads. "Yes." He closed the book. "If the null absorption has integrated with the fire energy, the combined signature becomes more complex, more visible to the right kind of perception." "The right kind meaning what exactly?" "Meaning individuals with sensing as a primary ability. There are 3 students in the current cohort, with documented sensing specializations. He paused. One of them is in Vane's study group. I sat with that for a moment. So, Vane didn't need the monitoring stone to find me. He has a person. Potentially, yes. And that person came to my door last night to confirm a location. It would explain the approach. Sensing types work through proximity and resonance. They need to get close to get a specific reading. Did they get one? He picked up the measuring rod and crossed to me, held it out. It read 12.2. Below threshold, he said. The anchor held even in your sleep. You did nothing wrong. The anchor tells them something is suppressing the source, I said. They confirmed a distant signal. Found silence when they got close. A sensing type knows that difference. Natural low output and deliberate suppression do not feel identical when you stand next to them. They will report that to Vane. Voss was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That is a more sophisticated analysis than I expected at this stage." It was the closest he had come to a compliment in 2 years. I filed it carefully. "So what do we do?" I said. He turned back to his desk. "We accelerate. The suppression is holding, but the situation has moved faster than my original timeline. We need to change your position." "My position?" "Your physical location in this building. Servant quarters are in the eastern corridor. That is exactly where Vane's monitoring has been focused. We need to move you elsewhere." "To where?" "There is a maintenance room adjacent to the alchemy storage on the second floor west wing. It has been unused for 3 years. It is not on any residential map of the academy." "You want me to move into a storage room?" "I want you to move into a location that does not exist on paper and cannot be found by proximity sensing because no one will know to look there." I thought about Gerald, about my cart, about the specific logistical problem of moving a large cauldron across the academy in the middle of the night without anyone noticing. "When?" I said. "Tonight, after the evening bell. I will have the room cleared before then." He sat back down and picked up his pen. The conversation was apparently over. "Training first. Show me the dark edges." I held out my palm. The flame came up, orange with the thin dark threads woven through the outer edge. Voss studied it for a long time with the measuring rod in his other hand. "The null energy has integrated approximately 40%, he said, faster than I modeled. Your absorption rate is higher than the historical records suggested was possible." "Is that a problem?" "It is a variable, a significant one." He moved around the flames slowly. "The combination of fire and null creates a specific effect when directed outward. I want to test something." He placed an empty glass on the desk between us. "Direct the flame at it, not to heat it, to negate it." "I don't know how to negate glass. The null energy does. You simply need to let it lead." I looked at the glass, then at the flame. I thought about what it felt like when the two energies sat together, the quieter feeling, the cancelling. I let the dark threads move forward instead of holding them back. The glass went silent, not broken, not moved, just suddenly, profoundly absent of whatever quality makes a glass rather than just a shape. It sat there looking exactly like glass and registering as absolutely nothing at all. Whatever made it real to a measuring instrument had simply been switched off while I watched. Voss stared at it. Then he looked at me. "Do you understand what you just did?" "No," I said, honestly. "Neither do I entirely," he said, which from Voss was a genuinely alarming thing to hear out loud. He picked up his notebook and wrote for 2 full minutes without stopping. I stood there, holding the flame and watching him carefully. Voss working through something he had not predicted was a rare event, the kind that told you significantly more than anything he chose to say out loud. "Nullification," he said finally. "Not suppression, not absorption. Active nullification of magical properties in a target object. This should not be possible in combination with fire affinity. The energies are theoretically incompatible in a single host. Every model I have says so." "And yet," I said. "And yet," he agreed. He looked at the glass returning slowly to normal, like something remembering what it was supposed to be. "Your core is not just holding both energies in parallel. It is actively synthesizing them into something that did not exist before." "Into what?" He looked at me. For the first time since I had known him, Aldrich Voss looked like someone who was not entirely sure he had made the right decision. "That," he said quietly, "is the question." Training ended. I went to my shift. I moved through the academy with the anchor stone in my pocket and the dark threads tucked quietly inside the orange warmth, and thought about synthesis, about what it meant to hold two things that should cancel each other out and have them become something that had not existed before either of them arrived. Something neither of them was on its own. I cleaned Voss's office. I cleaned the third-floor study rooms. I scrubbed Gerald in the utility alcove on the east side and thought about moving him tonight and what route made the most sense. At noon, I was in the second-floor corridor with my cart when Lyra appeared at the end of the hallway, walking fast. She saw me and changed direction slightly to pass closer than the corridor required. She did not slow down, did not look directly at me. But as she passed, she said very quietly and very quickly without turning her head, "Vane met with Harrow this morning. Private meeting. 1 hour." Then she was gone around the corner. I kept pushing my cart at exactly the same speed. Didn't stop, didn't look after her, just kept moving with the practiced invisibility of 2 years of being furniture. But my chest was doing something loud, and the anchor stone was suddenly very warm against my palm through the fabric of my pocket. 1 hour with Harrow, after the night visit, after the sensing attempt. That was not a routine check-in. That was a report being delivered. Vane had something concrete enough to bring to the dean directly. Whatever the sensing student had gotten from standing outside my door at 2 a.m. had been enough to escalate, enough to move this to the next level. Not a confirmation of identity the anchor had held, but enough to narrow things down, enough to bring it to the next level of institutional attention, enough to change what the next 24 hours looked like. I finished my shift. I ate dinner alone because Sora had an evening shift in the supply room and the dining hall was loud, and I needed to think without anyone watching my face while I did it. I thought about Harrow. I thought about the word containment and the folder Voss kept closing, and Elon Morrow, whose story I still did not know because Voss had decided twice that I was not ready for it. I was going to ask tonight, before the move, before whatever Vane had put in motion started moving in a direction I could not redirect. I needed to know what had happened to the last person who had been where I was. Because the thing about warnings is that they are only useful if you receive them before you need them. After is just information about a mistake that has already been made. I went back up to Voss's office at 7. He was packing a specific set of items into a case with the methodical precision of someone who had planned this particular packing in advance. He looked up when I came in, looked back down at the case. "The room is ready. Gerald can go through the west utility passage. I have cleared the maintenance log entry." "I need to know about Elon Morrow," I said. He did not stop packing. "You said when I was ready." "I'm ready." "I said I would determine when you were ready. Vane met with Harrow for an hour this morning. Whatever the sensing student got from outside my door was enough to escalate to the dean. That changes the timeline." He stopped packing, hands stilled on the case. He stayed like that for a long moment. Then he closed the case and sat down. He looked older than usual. Not tired, just the specific age that appears on people when something they knew was coming has finally arrived and is standing in their office. "Elon Morrow," he said, "absorption type, identified at this academy in 1962 at the age of 19, presented with 0 active output, identified through the same dormant pattern you showed." "Who identified him?" Voss looked at the desk. "The dean at the time. A man named Crest. He ran the research division that Harrow has been trying to rebuild for 11 years. I understood immediately. "Harrow is trying to rebuild what Crest built," he said, looking at his desk. "And Crest had Morrow. He had him for 4 years in a dedicated facility with full institutional support and 0 outside interference. Morrow's absorption capacity was studied, catalogued, directed towards 17 separate research initiatives. All of it documented at the time as fully successful. And after 4 years, Voss said, Morrow's core destabilized completely." The blue fireplace crackled once in the silence that followed. Neither of us moved for a moment. Repeated forced absorption of incompatible energy types at a pace his integration could not match. The researchers chose faster than his core could survive the choosing. Forced. The subjects do not choose what they absorb in a research context. The researchers choose, and Crest chose faster than Morrow's core could integrate. The destabilization was catastrophic. I sat very still. He died. Yes. Voss looked at me directly. At 23, in a facility below this building. Documented as an experimental accident. The program was formally suspended. He set his hands flat on the desk. Until Harrow spent 11 years deciding he knew better than Crest had. Until Harrow, who has spent 11 years reviewing Crest's methodology and believes he has identified the errors. He believes the process can be done safely with better pacing and monitoring. He believes, I said. Yes, he believes. He has not tested the belief because he has not had a subject. The word sat between us. Subject. The same word. A different version of the same story. You knew all of this when you set up the sphere, I said. Yes. And you decided to move first because a research subject doesn't choose what they absorb. But you did. I looked at him. You chose fire. Fire integrates most naturally with absorption-type energy. It was the safest possible first source. And yes, he met my eyes. I chose it deliberately because Harrow would not have. I sat with everything he had just told me. About Morrow, about Crest, about 11 years of Harrow reviewing methodology and waiting for a subject who kept not appearing until now. What do we do? I said finally. You move tonight. You continue training. The nullification ability is significant and needs development before it becomes a liability. He paused. And I'm going to make a visit tomorrow to someone who knows Harrow's program better than I do, someone who has been watching it since it began. He did not say who. I did not ask yet. One more thing, I said. He waited. The 4 years Morrow spent in that facility. Did he know what was happening to him? Did he understand what the forced absorption was doing? Voss was quiet for a long moment. No, he said. He trusted the institution. He believed he was participating in legitimate research for the benefit of the Academy. Another pause. He was 19. He had no one who had told him the truth before they needed him to do something. He looked at me with the most direct expression I had ever seen on his face. I am telling you now, before I need you to do anything, the decision about what comes next belongs to you, not to Harrow, not to this institution, not to me. His voice was even, precise, final. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I nodded. I stood up, picked up my cleaning supplies from where I had set them by the door. I'll move Gerald tonight, I said. West Utility Passage. Yes. I started toward the door. Kai. I stopped. Morrow did not have an anchor stone. He did not have nullification. He did not have the rate of integration you have shown. He looked at his desk. I am not telling you this to reassure you. I am telling you because it is accurate information that you are entitled to have. I know, I said. That's why I believe it. I left his office, down the stairs, through the corridor, past the founder's statue. He looked as disappointed as always in the flickering wall torches. I stopped in front of him for a moment. Ilan Morrow, I said quietly to the stone face. 19 years old. He didn't know what was happening to him. The torches flickered. The statue said nothing. I looked at the man who had built this institution 300 years ago and thought about the distance between what he had intended and what it had become. And what it had become, and the distance between those two things, and who got to decide which one was real. I pushed my cart past him toward the West Utility Passage. Gerald rattled quietly behind me. I know, I told him. I know. We moved through the dark corridor together, and the warmth in my chest burned steady. Orange and dark and entirely mine, moving toward a room that did not exist on any map, moving toward whatever came next, with the knowledge of what had happened before and the specific stubborn intention of making sure it did not happen again. Not to me. Not because of me. Not on my watch. The Academy was quiet around us. Somewhere above, in an office with a blue fireplace, Voss was planning a visit to someone who had been watching Harrow for 11 years. Somewhere above, a monitoring stone sat in its wooden case, reading ambient noise and finding nothing worth reporting. And somewhere in this building, A sensing student was writing up notes for Marcus Vane. None of them knew yet where I was or what the nullification was becoming inside me while they pointed their instruments at places I had already left. None of them knew yet where I was going. None of them knew about the nullification or what it meant or what it was becoming inside me while they were busy looking in the places I used to be. I was beginning to understand the only real advantage I had. Not the power, not the anchor, not even Voss and whatever he was planning for tomorrow. Just this. They were always looking at where I had been. I was already somewhere else and getting harder to find with every hour that passed. That was the plan. That was the only plan that actually worked. The maintenance room was exactly what Voss had described. Small, unmapped, 3 years of dust on every surface. A pipe in the corner made a sound like someone sighing deeply every 40 minutes. I named it Gerald 2 immediately. It felt right. I named the pipe Gerald 2. Gerald the original sat in the corner with a quiet dignity of something that had survived worse relocations and had opinions about this one, but was keeping them to himself. The room had one narrow window facing the courtyard. I could see the corridor junction where 2 main thoroughfares crossed, completely accidental as a vantage point. In my experience, the accidental ones are always the ones that prove most useful. I spent the first night clearing dust, moving in a blanket, a change of clothes, a folder of notes on my abilities. Voss kept detailed notebooks. I had decided this was a habit worth developing, without consulting anyone who might have opinions about servants keeping records of things. The anchor stone went on the floor beside where I slept. The broadcast was dampened enough that proximity sensing now required being in the same room. No one knew this room existed on any floor plan. No one was going to stand outside this door at 2 a.m. and find anything worth reporting to Marcus Vane. No one knew this room existed except Voss. No one was going to stand outside this door at 2 a.m. because no one knew there was a door here worth standing outside of. That alone was worth a night of dust. I woke up the next morning to Gerald 2 sighing at me. 5:30. Earlier than usual. I lay there for a moment and thought about Ellen Morrow, which had become something I did in quiet moments without deciding to. 19 years old. No one who told him the truth first. Trusting an institution that was measuring how fast it could push him before something broke. 23 years old. A facility below this building. I was 18. I had Voss. I had the anchor stone. I had nullification that should not exist, and a learning rate that had made a professor who had taught for 17 years stop and recalculate. I thought about the distance between those two situations. It was real. It was significant, and it was not a guarantee of anything. Significant advantages are only significant if you use them correctly. I got up, practiced the suppression for 30 minutes in the dark, then went to Voss's office 20 minutes early because Voss had said he was making a visit today and I needed to know where before he left. He was already packed. A small case. The kind that said, one day, not overnight. He looked up when I came in and said, "I will be back before evening bell. Continue your regular shifts." "Where are you going?" "To speak with someone who has been watching Harrow's program since its inception." He picked up the case. "Her name is Professor Wren. She retired from this academy 9 years ago." "Why did she retire?" He paused at the door, just briefly. "Because she disagreed publicly with Harrow's approach to research ethics. The disagreement was not resolved in her favor." He left. I stood in his empty office for a moment. The blue fireplace was burning low. The measuring rod was on his desk. The folder with Elon Morrow's name on it was in the locked drawer. I went to work, cleaned the 3rd floor study rooms, swept the east corridor, avoided the eastern tower, and added 3 minutes going the long way around. Gerald accepted the detour without complaint. He had always been philosophically adaptable about routes. It was one of his better qualities. At 10 in the morning, I was in the 1st floor corridor near the main entrance hall when Marcus Vane walked past me with 2 other students. He did not look at me. He looked at something in his hand. A small device. Flat. About the size of a playing card. It had a faint glow to it that pulsed slowly. Not the grey stone in the wooden case. Something different. Something newer. I kept moving, same pace, same direction. Anchor stone pressed against my palm through my pocket. The warmth in my chest stayed at exactly 12.2% and did not move. Vane and his group went through the main entrance toward the outer courtyard. I turned the corner and pressed against the wall and thought about that device for a very specific amount of time. It was a directional reader, not an ambient detector. Ambient detectors read the area around them generally. Directional readers pointed at a specific target. More expensive, more precise, and significantly harder to fool with a general suppression technique. But the key word was calibrated. Directional readers required a specific target frequency set in advance. I did not know for certain that the anchor stone held against a directional reader. Voss had calibrated it against the grey monitoring stone. He had not tested it against whatever Vane was now carrying. I needed to know. Before Vane pointed that device at me in a corridor with nowhere to go. I needed to know today, which meant I needed to find out how it worked before evening bell when Voss returned. I thought about this for exactly 4 minutes standing in the corridor. Then I went to find Sora, because Sora was the person I went to when a problem had a technical dimension I could not resolve alone. She was in the supply room on the 3rd floor doing inventory. She had a clipboard and the specific expression of someone reconciling numbers that were not reconciling themselves cooperatively. "I need to ask you something," I said. "What do you know about directional magical readers?" She looked up from the clipboard. "Set it down." She looked at me with the expression she had been quietly building toward for 3 weeks. The one that meant she had run out of patience for waiting. "That is a very specific question," she said. "Yes. Directional readers are faculty-level equipment. Students are not supposed to have them." She paused. "Why are you asking me this?" "Because someone has one, and I need to know how their calibration actually works." Sora looked at me for a long moment. Then she set the clipboard down behind her with the deliberate care of someone deciding a conversation has earned their complete attention. "Kai," she said, "whatever is happening with you right now, I need you to understand that I have been watching it for 3 weeks and constructing a fairly detailed picture in my head about what it might be. I know. And I need you to understand that whatever it is, it does not change the fact that you are my friend, and I'm not going to say anything to anyone, regardless of what you tell me." I looked at her. She looked back. "I absorbed magic," I said. "Accidentally, a month ago. Some people want to use that for research, and I would prefer they didn't. Same flat tone I used to report broken fixtures." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Voss." "Yes." "He found you first. He set it up. He said it was the safest way to make sure Harrow didn't get there before I had any control." She nodded slowly. Processing. Filing. The specific internal procedure I had watched her run on information for 2 years. "Directional readers," she said finally, "calibrate to a specific signature frequency. They do not read general ambient output. They are tuned in advance to a target frequency and then pointed. If the frequency is not present, the reader returns nothing." She looked at me carefully. "If someone has tuned a directional reader to your specific frequency, the anchor stone suppresses ambient output, but not the underlying signature itself. The reader would still find you." I sat with that. "Is there a way to change the underlying signature?" She was quiet for a moment. "Theoretically, if the signature itself changed, which would require the energy composition inside you to shift significantly." I thought about the dark threads, the nullification. The synthesis Voss had said was happening at a rate he had not modeled. "What if it already has?" I said. She looked at me. "Has it?" "I think so. The composition is different from what it was a month ago. Significantly different." She was quiet again, thinking. The clipboard sat forgotten on the shelf behind her. "Then the frequency Vane tuned his reader to is already outdated," she said slowly. "If the signature has changed enough, the reader would be looking for something that no longer exists in its original form." I felt something settle in my chest that was not the warmth. Something quieter. The specific feeling of a problem that had seemed very large, revealing a seam that might run all the way through it. "How would I know if it had changed enough?" I said. She reached behind her on the shelf and pulled out a small glass instrument, thin tube, liquid inside that sat at different levels depending on what it was near. Magical composition indicator. We use them for ingredient verification. She held it near me. The liquid moved, settled at a position about 2/3 up the tube. This is what you read as right now. She pulled out a second one, set it next to the first. The liquid in the second tube settled at a different level. Lower. This is standard fire affinity, she said. They are not the same reading. I looked at the two levels. The difference was more than I had expected. The null integration changed it that much. Considerably, she said quietly. Whatever you are right now, it is not what Vane's reader was tuned to last week. He is looking for something that no longer exists in you. I stood in the supply room and felt the specific satisfaction of a problem revealing its seam. Vane had a directional reader calibrated to find me. He was already pointing it at the wrong target, and had been probably since the day he paid for it. That was not luck. That was the null integration doing its job before I even knew it had one. "Thank you," I said. She picked up her clipboard. "Don't thank me. Tell me what happens when it's over." She went back to her numbers. I went back to my shift and pushed Gerald through the corridors, thinking about seams, about the difference between a solid problem and one that has been quietly changing shape while you worried about its surface, about the difference between a problem that is solid all the way through and a problem that looks solid but has been quietly changing shape underneath while you were busy worrying about its surface. At 2 in the afternoon, Vane was in the second floor corridor with his reader. I was at the far end of that corridor with my cart. He did not see me immediately. He was focused on the device. I made a decision in approximately 3 seconds. I did not turn around. I did not take a different route. I pushed the cart forward at my regular pace directly down the corridor toward him. He looked up when he heard the cartwheels, looked at me, looked at his device, pointed it in my direction. The device showed nothing. He adjusted the calibration, pointed again, nothing. I reached his position and said, "Excuse me," in the completely flat tone of a servant who needs to get past with a cart. He stepped aside automatically. I pushed Gerald past him and continued down the corridor. Behind me, I heard him adjust the device again. Check it. Make a sound that was not quite frustration, but was in that direction. I turned the corner at the end of the corridor and kept going. I did not smile. I did not speed up. I walked at exactly the pace of someone who had somewhere to be and no unusual awareness about anything. 2 years of practice. Every hallway of this building, every single day. Being invisible was a skill I had earned through repetition. Being invisible was a skill. I had never before appreciated how much of a skill it actually was. Vane had a sophisticated piece of equipment and a specific target, and I had just walked past him with a cauldron. Gerald made a small sound that in context felt like approval. I told him he was being generous and kept walking. The warmth in my chest was quiet and steady and exactly where I had put it. Voss returned at 6. He came directly to the maintenance room rather than his office. He looked at the room without comment. He looked at Gerald without comment. He sat down on the only chair. I sat on the floor. Both of us were quiet for a moment in the way that people are quiet, when they both know that what comes next is going to be significant. He sat down on the only chair. I sat on the floor. "Ren," he said. I waited. He had the expression of someone organizing information before delivering it and did not like being rushed. She has been tracking Harrow's program documentation for 9 years. She has copies of Crest's original research files that the Academy believes were destroyed. He paused long enough for the low fire to crackle once and settle. She also has Morrow's personal journals. He said it quietly, the way you say something you have been carrying for a long time. I went still. He kept journals. He kept journals throughout his time in the facility. Ren removed them after his death, before the incident documentation was formalized. She has had them for 62 years. What do they say? Voss looked at his hands. They say that Morrow understood, toward the end, what was happening to him. Not at the beginning, not in the middle, only in the last 4 months. And he didn't do anything. He had no anchor stone. He had no nullification. He had no knowledge of what an absorption type was or what his rights within the research framework should have been. He had no one who told him the truth first, I said. Voss looked up, met my eyes. No, he did not. Silence. Gerald, too, sighed in the corner. Both of us ignored it. Wren wants to meet you, Voss said. She has been waiting 9 years for another absorption type to appear, not for research purposes, for the opposite reason. I understood what he meant. She wants to be the one who tells the truth first this time. Yes. He reached into his case and placed a slim document on the floor between us. She also wants to give you this. It was a legal filing. Dense text. Official Academy formatting. I read the first paragraph twice and then a third time. A formal research subject rights declaration. Once filed, it required explicit consent before every single procedure on a named individual, with no exceptions. This exists, I said. It has existed for 40 years, created after Morrow, as a direct result of what happened to him. He paused. It has never been used, because there has been no research subject to file it for since the day it was written. Until now. Until now. I looked at the document, at the formal language that someone had written 40 years ago in the specific hope that it would protect the next person who ended up where Morrow had been. Someone who had never met that person, who could not know when they would exist or what they would look like or what they would be capable of, who wrote the document anyway and waited. I picked it up. If I file this, Harrow knows I exist officially. Yes, but he also knows that any approach to you requires your explicit consent at every stage. Any violation becomes an academic council matter, with formal documented consequences, he added. Not merely institutional discomfort or an internal review that disappears into an administrative drawer. Actual council-level accountability with a paper trail. It changes what containment means. It makes containment significantly more complicated to justify. It does not make it impossible, but it changes the negotiation entirely. He looked at me. It is your decision. I sat on the floor of a room that did not exist on any map and held a document that had been waiting 40 years for me to exist and thought about Ellen Morrow writing in his journals in the last 4 months, understanding too late. No anchor, no choice. No one who had told him the truth before they needed him to do something. I thought about the weight of that. The specific, precise weight of it. Then I thought about Voss sitting across from me on the only chair, about Sora in the supply room with her composition indicators, about Lyra closing a door cleanly on Vane's voice without looking back, about the fact that I had walked past a directional reader with a cauldron and it had found nothing, about Wren, who had kept 62-year-old journals in a box for exactly this reason. None of them had done any of it because protocol required it. All of them had done it because the alternative was letting something go wrong that they had the specific ability to prevent. I looked at the document. Then I looked at Voss. I want to meet Wren first, I said. Before I file anything, I want to read the journals if she'll let me. He nodded once. I expected that. And then I'm going to file it, with my name on it, in front of the academic council, publicly. He was quiet for a moment. That will not be a quiet process. No, I agreed. It won't. He looked at me with the expression I had been learning to read. Not quite approval, because Voss did not do approval the way other people did, but the thing adjacent to it, the thing that occupied the same space and meant the same thing when you knew how to look. The nullification, he said. We need to continue working on it. If you are going to be publicly identified, you need the ability to protect yourself against forced absorption. I know. We also need to determine the limits of what you can synthesize. The combination of fire and null is the first instance. There may be others. Given your integration rate, there will almost certainly be others. How many types of magic are there in this academy? I asked. He looked at me. 17 documented elemental and esoteric classifications across 3,000 students and 46 faculty members. I looked at my hand and called up the flame. Orange with dark threads woven through it, steady and completely quiet. Two energies that should not coexist, sitting together as something new. No name yet. Entirely mine. The only classification that mattered right now. One at a time, I said. He made the sound that was not quite a word, but meant he agreed with the approach. Gerald, too, sighed in the corner. The flame in my palm flickered once and held steady. That evening, I wrote in my own notebook for the first time. Not about training, not about suppression levels or integration rates or the directional reader in the corridor, about Elon Morrow. About a 19-year-old in 1962 who had written in his journals every day for 4 years and only understood what was happening in the last 4 months, who had no one on his side before it was too late. I wrote down his name so that it existed somewhere outside a locked drawer and a retired professor's collection and the institutional memory of an incident that had been documented as an accident. I wrote it clearly at the top of a blank page, Elon Morrow. Absorption type, Eldon Moore Academy, 1962, and then below it, my own name, Kai, 18 years old, same academy, 62 years later, still here, different situation, different outcome, not because of luck or fate or the universe deciding to be fair this time around, because someone moved first with the right information and the right tools. Because Voss had read 8 months of assessments and made a decision about a cartwheel and a cauldron. Because Wren had kept journals in a box for 6 decades without knowing who would eventually need them. Because some people act before they know the outcome. Because that decision, made early enough and honestly enough, is what makes a different outcome possible at all. Because Sora had walked to my door before my shift with a warning that did not require explanation or repayment. Because Lyra had passed me in a corridor and said 7 words without stopping or turning around. None of them had done these things because they were required to. None of them had done it because it served the institution or advanced a research agenda or satisfied a protocol. They had done it because the alternative was letting something go wrong that they had the specific ability to prevent. I understood that now in a way I had not understood it when I was just cleaning floors. Some things are worth doing with exactly what you have available to you, even if what you have is an unmapped room and a cauldron and a flame with dark threads and a 40-year-old document that has been waiting. I closed the notebook. The anchor stone was warm beside me. Gerald sat in the corner. Gerald, too, sighed once more and went quiet. Through the narrow window, the inner courtyard was dark and still. Somewhere in the east wing, a monitoring stone sat in its case reading ambient noise and finding nothing worth noting. Somewhere, Marcus Vane was looking at a directional reader that had returned empty results. Trying to understand why a signature he had been tracking simply stopped existing. Getting the wrong answer to the right question, which was its own kind of progress that happened to be entirely in my favor. Somewhere, Dean Harrow was building a plan around a subject he had not yet officially identified, and somewhere, a retired professor named Wren had a box of 62-year-old journals. She had been waiting 9 years to hand them to the right person. Tomorrow, I would go and be exactly that. I owed her that much. I owed Morrow that much. The math on that was not complicated. Tomorrow, the next part of this would begin. The part that was less about hiding and more about what happens when you stop. About what it looks like when you decide to be visible on your own terms. That was a different kind of problem than suppression, and a considerably more interesting one. The kind where being seen was part of the strategy rather than the thing you were trying to prevent. I had been invisible for 2 years. Furniture, background, the person you look past on the way to somewhere more important. The servant who cleaned Aldrich Voss's office every morning without being seen. I had been Gerald's owner and the mop in the East Corridor and the name on no official document worth reading. I was still all of those things. And I was also something else. Something a monitoring stone could not find and a directional reader could not calibrate to. Something an 11-year institutional plan had not accounted for, because no plan accounts for the thing it does not know exists yet. The flame in my palm was orange and dark and entirely mine. I closed it and went to sleep with my name written on a blank page next to a name that was 62 years older than mine. Both of us in the same building. Both of us the same impossible thing. The difference was everything that had happened in the space between us, and I was not going to waste a single piece of it. Not now. Not in this building. Not in this life that started with a loose cartwheel and a cauldron named Gerald. And a sphere of compressed fire positioned very deliberately on the edge of a desk by someone who had read 8 months of patterns and decided to move first. ready to be caught by someone who did not know yet what catching it would mean, but who reached out anyway because the alternative was letting it fall, and some things you just do not let fall. Whatever came next was going to find me prepared, and that, in the end, was the only thing that had ever actually mattered.